and welcome to this edition of EMS Now Up Close. I am Eric Miskell with EMS Now, and it's my pleasure today to speak with the gentleman from Freedom. Freedom, of course, is a global component distributor. But we have with us today, again, John Magee, who is the President of Sales and Operations. And joining us for the first time is Andy Barnett. He's the new Vice President of Business Development with Freedom. So, gentlemen, thank you for taking time to speak with me today. Before we start, though, Andy, it's your first time. Let me give you a chance to kind of introduce yourself, your background. You've been in the industry for a while. You're not new to this. So for the benefit of the audience, give us the quick pitch.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric, I enjoy being on the show. Thanks for the invite. I've been in the industry now about 16 years. Prior to joining Freedom 5 months ago, the rest of my career has been at Aero Electronics, where I had a number of different roles. Started as an account development rep, and then by the end of my career, based out of Orlando, Florida, I was responsible for the Mid-Atlantic and Southeast region as an area sales director. So 6 branches and about $500 million in sales a year. So I've been through a couple allocation cycles at this point, and definitely have had my fill of electronics component distribution. So excited to be on board with Freedom, though. It's been very interesting. I think we'll talk a little bit about it, to see the other side of the fence on some of this stuff, and it's really exciting what we have going on.
Yeah, no, excellent. Well, thank you. I looked at you on LinkedIn, but I'm sure the audience appreciates knowing that. So we live in interesting times here in this industry, don't we? There's a lot of change. There's a lot of things going on. Let me just start, maybe, John, how would you characterize kind of this current phase we're in as we're launching into 2025?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I often say to Eric, right, you start to hear people talking about we're going to have improvement at certain times, and that usually picks up some steam because, being a little cynical, right? People say it enough and they hope it's going to come true. But the reality is, you got to go execute in the marketplace. So what we see is an evolution as we came out of the COVID years, the allocation times of 21 and 22. A lot of the larger customers engaged us, which we kind of knew maybe wouldn't be our long-term customer base. But, you get in and you support them and you build some relationships. Our core base has always been kind of the mid-size customer and maybe down, if you will. And we're really seeing those customers come back, and they're looking for services and they're looking for resources. Our book to bill has been positive for about 7 months now. So that's a great sign, right, for the health of our business. And some of that's account expansion, and some of that is just, our core customers realizing that, yeah, they still need services and support in the marketplace. So even though the overall economic, maybe a little tough, I think there's still a lot of companies out there trying to, sell their products, engineer their products, get to market, and they're looking for partners who can help, right? So we're trying to fill that void.
Do you see activity picking up at all as the year is starting?
We do. Now, some of that's for us is through new customer acquisition. With Andy's role, he's bringing some relationships that, people that he knew in the industry already. And even if he didn't have relationship insight about maybe care-abouts for those businesses and some of our services that might really match well with them. So we're seeing kind of a combination of both, some organic growth and then some new customer acquisition growth that's been really, really exciting.
Yeah, cool. And anything you want to add to what John was saying there about this?
I think it's interesting, and we talk about this ad nauseum with customers, but 2020 to 2023 was unlike anything anyone had ever seen, right? And I mentioned being through historical allocation periods. Generally speaking, it was caused by a disruptive technology and or a disruption in a technology, right? So when the iPhone came out in 2006, the demand for electronics goes through the roof. People aren't able to keep up. 2018, Murata exits 0603 and larger cap sizes, creates a void for a period of time. The hard thing with what we went through is it started with COVID, but as it progressed into 21, 22, it really was the overall demand for electronics. So I agree with John. What we're seeing is kind of a wait and see moment. There's a lot of raw materials still available on the market. A lot of customers have a lot of finished goods, the exciting thing and scary thing at the same time is what happens when this inventory burn off completes. What kind of pressure comes back into the market? And, you know, the fact is we've heard a lot about TSMC and guys like TI, Infineon, ST investing in front-end fabrication. Those are 3 to 5 year processes and multi-billion-dollar investments. So, you know, if the market comes back with any level of strength in the next 6 to 8 months, the pressures that we felt, especially towards, you know, end of 21 into 22, very likely could come back. It's not going to be, you know, clean business as we knew it. And the last data point, like you look at standard lead times in 2019, pretty much across the board, it was 12 to 14 weeks. Even in the softest market we've had right now, SIA data has lead times somewhere between 18 and 20 weeks. So for supply chain people, another 4 weeks is a lifetime, and that's in a soft market. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but we tell customers all the time, be prepared for the unknown, because we are most likely heading back into that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Listen, but you touch on something I want to follow up on. It's kind of the customers, as you're out there and talking, you're saying you're talking about. So what do customers want in this current environment? What are you hearing?
You can tackle it first.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? And I love big franchise distribution. Obviously, that's my core. That's where I learned the industry and the business. But they're looking for more than a bank. And unfortunately, that's what it feels like big distribution has become. It always has been a working capital partner, but the pendulum will swing one way or the other. And it's really swung towards, you know, how do they help finance? And I think customers coming out of a very painful period where just-in-time manufacturing was thrown by the wayside. It was, you know, manufacture at any cost to keep lines up and running and people employed. They're now looking for, as John highlighted, the core distribution services that industry used to be known for. Who's willing to carry inventory? Who's willing to be a partner? Take a little shared risk. You know, who's going to listen to my needs as a customer and put a plan in place that meets those, instead of here's the industry standard way of going to market. I hope it fits your business plan.
Yeah, Eric, I would add that, you know, what we really, I think, learned, you know, as an independent is, you know, pre all this stuff, right, pre 2020, you know, we had our niches and we had our core customers and all this stuff. But I think the industry has learned that if you don't have a good independent in your supply chain, that you're probably missing out at this point, right? No matter, and you can pick any of our competitors, doesn't matter, right? None of us are going to replace Arrow or Avnet or anything like that, right? We're supplementing those kind of companies. But if you're not prepared to jump in and really turn quickly, right, as the market moves, you know, what the COVID year showed is that all those companies couldn't do anything to stop the lead time jumps, right? Their inventory profiles were what they were. As things went to double digits and then into 20 and 30 and 40 weeks, they couldn't get there, right? So you had to have companies who could help you navigate inside lead time, access different, you know, inventory, maybe even different regions. You know, it could be still very much a traditional channel, but you know, you're a customer here in Florida and you don't know where to start in Europe or Asia or something like that. And, you know, Freedom was a really good conduit for a lot of companies for that stuff. So, you know, we've really seen our value grow, and even new customers that we talk to, they're like, everything he says makes so much sense. And then it's trying to figure out how do we engage and, you know, where really do we fit? You know, because again, we're going to find our niche if they give us enough access. And it's really exciting, I think, for us at Freedom, you know, all the services that we have to offer, they still offer a lot of value. And you've heard me talk about this previously. Customer service and flexibility are core drivers that are missing in some of the large distribution models. And the customers feel that. Now, they still work with them because they need to, but they are looking for a little extra love in certain, you know, corners of their business. And we've really been able to kind of get out there and fill that void. So it's been a lot of fun, for sure.
Listen, I appreciate that about, you know, that you are an independent. And by the way, I did note that you were recently ranked, what, number 9 out of the top 15 independent distributors by electronic sourcing. So congratulations for that. Obviously a testament to the work and to the company. But So how is life as an independent in 2025? I mean, it seems very positive. You're able to attract talent from one of the larger ones as well. So
Yeah, no, I think maybe some of the stigma that used to, surround the channel, Eric, it doesn't exist anymore, not in the same kind of ways. And, again, pick a company and ask them if they dealt with independence in the last 3 or 4 years, and the answer is going to be yes. And maybe to varying degrees of success, right? That's always part of the mix. But I think we're in an age where we're really being counted on to be a supply chain partner. And again, where can we fit to really help, the customer get to their end goal? I mean, let's not kid ourselves, right? They have revenue goals to make. They got to get products out to their customers to keep things moving. And it's really costly, right? If one component's not there, they can't build their product, right? So, I'd say the general answer is life as an independent right now is pretty good. And it's because I think we're getting unfettered access for the first time to a lot of customers who are saying, you know what, I need to investigate this and I need to see if you can do some of the things that we're talking about, because I'm not getting that from my standard supply chain. And if I don't do that, I'm stuck in this box and maybe I need to be, half in the box and half out of the box.
yeah, and that's interesting. As I hear you say that, I'm reflecting on the tariff issue that's so prominent in that, and I hear a lot of smart people talking about saying, listen, one of the things you need to do to mitigate that is is communicate with a lot of different suppliers, right, and to have a lot of that in place. So
Sure.
what impact do you think these continuously changing tariff environment is having on the industry?
It's very disruptive, right? And for everybody, we're all spending a lot of time and energy trying to keep up with it. In our world, we have to do a lot of that homework on the front end. We buy from some of the large franchise distributors, and we see that they don't necessarily have it all figured out either. They're very much mobilizing and trying to put their best foot forward as we are. So I think what we've recognized is, again, you got to have the tools to be able to do the homework. We're a global company. We sell a lot into Canada, for example. Until recently, Canada's name hasn't been in the tariff world. And it's really, if we're going to inventory parts for them, if we bring it through the US and it was manufactured in China, they're paying the tariff, right? So we may have to find alternate routes to, inventory product. And we have those capabilities to hold material outside of the US and maybe ship to Canada without having to come through, the US. And, it's one of those things. If you're a Canadian customer, we met with one last week, was down to visit, they're like, yeah, our customers aren't going to pay this. We haven't had to deal with it. So just because you're a US based company, we don't care. So we've had to develop some models, right, where we can do some things and have some partnerships to warehouse in different parts of the world than maybe we would have previously, 2 or 3 years ago. And the numbers are getting pretty big, so I think the biggest challenge is that you may have customers who have been building products for years and they were able to absorb a small fraction of the tariff, right? And now they're struggling because all of a sudden it could be, huge content. It could be a finished good that now is being tariffed that wasn't being tariffed before. And they have no choice but to kind of pass it down the supply chain. So I think a lot of disruption, a lot of people trying to see, could they find for want of a better word, a loophole? And there's not that many of them, so.
And it's interesting, because tariffs started 8 years ago and we're back to the same executive leadership structure. So there's have been lessons learned, right? As they're rolling out these increased tariffs, they are shutting down some of the loopholes that customers and franchise distributors and the like had found the first time around, whether it was warehousing in Mexico, duty drawbacks. They're starting to shut some of those down, which is challenging. I think, ultimately the challenge with tariffs is the behavior that the government in the United States in particular is trying to spur. While well-intentioned, all these things take a long time. It is not easy to pick up a manufacturing facility from Asia Pac and move it to the United States, as an example. So, it's now about being flexible, being creative, which I think is one of the things that we bring to the table, really listening to a customer, understanding what they need, and are there different ways that we can bring to market, because we are nimble, we are small. But it's a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge for distributors, it's a challenge for customers, and it's ever changing, so.
Well, one of the last things I'd say on Eric, and it's a simple solution because you're throwing money at it, but we had some customers that pre-bought and asked us to store material. So we brought in the inventory in Q4, and we've agreed to hold, and let them do MRP release and, flexible things to push and pull their demand. And, we're only kicking the can down the road, right? But they got some relief, right? And, we're glad to offer that for the customers who felt that they wanted to take advantage of it. So sometimes it just comes down, again, that's a pure distribution service. Buy the inventory, hold the inventory, ship the inventory out over, multiple months and quarters. But we've added a lot of value for some people where they could, at least short term, redeploy their capital and maybe go fight some other fire, that they need to fight till later in the year.
No, that's interesting. So tell me, related to all this is, we went from material shortages to material excess, right? Seemingly like that. How is that current situation? What's the situation as you see it with the excess inventory in the market?
Yeah, so a lot of customers still have a lot of excess. Even, a lot of people hoped that 23 and 24 would be burn off years, and they have, right? A lot of excess, I would really classify it as large customers as slow moving. They took inventory earlier than expected because lead times changed quickly, right? They were planning on 60-week lead times, and inventory showed up in 18 weeks, and it was shipped to them, from some of the large players in the market. So I think a lot of their strategy was like, all right, we'll see how it goes. They didn't do the traditional, hey, at the end of the year, maybe we want to take a partial write-off and move some inventory and all this kind of stuff. They've sat on it hoping that the things would change. And what we see is that I think we're headed towards a decision point where a lot of those companies are saying, all right, we still have a lot of inventory, and we do, they might be publicly traded companies. We need to move some of this. And one of the bad news elements of this is that their day codes have become older. They could have bought this inventory in 21 and 22, and maybe even at that time bought, 2020 day codes. As an example, they were only a couple years old. And now as they release their excess to the market, it may be helpful for some companies still, could be some inventory that is relatively long lead time, could give you some pockets of relief if you had a spike in demand or something. But people are also going to deal with like that inventory. If you have the excess, it's going to be less valuable because the day codes are older. So even though I would say it's more acceptable in today's market, Eric, right? The parts are super robust, PPMs are low, but if you're competing with 2020 day codes with 2024 and 2025 day codes, somebody's going to want the newer, just because what if it sits on your shelf for a year, right? Now it's going to be 6 years old versus 2 years old. So it's kind of an offshoot of that, but I think there's going to be a lot of movement in excess as we get towards the end of 2025, where if you've carried that for 2 or 3 years, I think you're finally saying, all right, if I haven't consumed it, I gotta move on and take my accounting hits and all that kind of stuff. So definitely one of those inflection points. And lead times, I think, and Andy will talk a little bit more intelligently to this, the days of having 4 to 6 week lead times won't exist probably anytime soon, because the supply base, both the distributors and the chip makers, they like having more insight into the demand of their customers, right? The better place for them is probably 16 to 24 weeks. But that's hard to manage too. So excess may help some people because, right, all of a sudden you get a jam and there'd be some inventory available. But in the long term, companies are still having to plan in a much longer cycle than what they did, 4 or 5 years ago. That kind of touches back to, your original question, what's life like as an independent? You know what? The cycles are different. And I think even though shortages don't feel as prevalent, it's much easier to fall into a, month-long shortage versus like this catastrophic, what we dealt with, in 21 and 22. So there's still a lot of spot stuff where that's going to pop up and surprise some people. And again, the good news, you get a spiked order from your customer. Bad news is It's 20 weeks out, what do I do, right? So I think companies like Freedom are gonna, have the opportunity to really help some people mitigate that in the short term. Anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I totally agree, and it's interesting with the date codes, and we talked about some of this. I mean, I read a white paper recently where they were talking about JEDIC standards, and they had done some advanced testing where they did 15-year aging, advanced aging on parts at 85% humidity, 85 degrees, and they found nominal, less than 1% impact on the performance of the parts electrically. So, when the standards were put in place for that 2-year date code, that's when plastics would carry more moisture and could lead to delamination, that sort of things. With the new substrates, the new epoxy packaging they have, the way that they're, tinning or leading leads, that's less of a concern. Where John and I talk about, and it's interesting, and again, it's not a knock, it's their business model, but suppliers and big distributors are in the process of selling more, selling new all the time. And we're in this weird state where, we're talking a lot about, and we hear companies talk about carbon credits and being environmentally sustainable and reliable. And, I look at it as a consumer and someone from the outside looking in a little bit too of, hey, there's known good parts out there, right? Just because the date code may be older than 2 years, there's still value in that. And there has been human manpower put into it, mining, takes a tremendous amount of purified water and energy to make parts. How do we continue to, from a sustainability standpoint, right? Instead of scrapping these things, how do we continue to turn them into revenue generation for our customers? And really, I think it helps enhance the manufacturing process. One of the things that we haven't, I don't think, seen the full impact of is all the supplier consolidations that have happened over the past 10 or 15 years. I mean, again, I always use Linear Tech as the example, but Linear Tech used to be 4 companies that are now 1 company, right? So you've got Analog Devices, Linear Tech, Maxim, and Hittite all became 1 company. They aggregated all these SKUs that they have, which puts a lot of pressure on the manufacturing process. At some point, they're going to have to look at that and lack of better terms, trim the fat. So there's a period of obsolescence and end of life that's going to come. It's part of the reason why they're looking for longer lead time, because whether it's a microcontroller or an LDO, it takes 16, 18 weeks to make a semiconductor component. How do they plan that? How do you balance customer need versus your own manufacturing process? And it's just going to become more complicated over time. So, are there things that we can do as an industry to help simplify some of this process for everybody and make it easier?
No, that's very good. And yeah, it's interesting your comments on the date codes, because there's a lot of talk of that in the industry right now. And you're right. I mean, a lot of it has to do with the technology is better now, as you were indicating, but then also the storage, right? And how these are being stored, and the storage practices and what's available is a heck of a lot better now than it was years ago. So that's certainly improving. So it'll be an interesting trend to kind of follow and see how that plays out.
And, embedded in that whole thing, you didn't use the words, but excess inventory effectively is more green, right? Because you're repurposing it, right? It hasn't been used, right? It just wasn't consumed. And I think that's an interesting element that, again, the industry is going to grapple with, because again, if you're a big chip maker, what do you want to do? You want to design new parts, you want to make new parts, and ship new parts. So do you really want your customers kind of sharing those old, formerly produced parts behind the scenes, right? To kind of, I don't need them anymore, but you do. So there's been a lot of long-term pushback on that stuff from the chip makers. But again, as companies really look to try to be a little greener and get their carbon credits, as Andy said, I think excess, not that it's a dirty word, but I think it is a valuable thing that, the tools to really manage that well and try to help share it when it needs to be shared are really good for the industry from a, being responsible citizen kind of standpoint. So
yeah, no, that good perspective there. Thank you. Say, listen, before I let you go, I would be failing at my job if I didn't ask you to look forward for the rest of 2025 and offer an opinion. So to the best of your current ability and insight, how do you think 2025 is going to shake out for the industry?
I think it's gonna continue to ramp, right? And that's part of my job is, communicating with the relationships I made in franchise distribution with the large suppliers. The general sentiment, and we heard it a lot since the middle of 2023, but the general sentiment, as boisterous as I've heard it, has been that Q4 was the bottom. We've been bouncing kind of Q2, Q3, Q4 last year, and things are starting to tick up. It all depends. I mean, there's so many factors involved, right? Tariffs, there's a lot of macroeconomic trends going on out there, whether it's conflicts, potential conflicts, the trade wars that will always add a level of uncertainty. But it is, when we talk to customers, especially in the EMS space, a lot of them, most of them are talking about the fact that their lines are full. They're pumping out product, they're burning through inventory. So I think by second half of the year, we're gonna see demand, as the industry has traditionally seen it come back into the channel. And the thing that, is both nerve-wracking and exciting as a sales organization is, I think some of the challenges that we faced towards the end of the chip crisis will return. I think we'll start to see lead times tick out again. I definitely think we'll see allocation on specific product segments, especially driven by new technologies like AI. I worry about memory. In particular, I worry about high-speed interconnect. I worry about some of these, high-end capacitors and resistors that need to go into these large data centers and GPU systems. So, I think there will be periods of challenges that are going to come, and for customers, that's a hole that a company like Freedom can help them fill pretty easily. So,
yeah, I'll give you a little bit more of a Freedom-centric view in that, a lot of customers who will be our traditional customer, like that mid-sized customer, they don't have the resources to necessarily go buy a year out and put out those kind of finances, right? So we're gonna help, with those kind of things. And they're also gonna, some of the new technologies, right, and as you talk about AI, they're using chips that aren't really the common chips that are used across the primary industrial world, right? Medical, all these kind of sustainable kind of things. So those actually are under more pressure than even, the people that are competing, with the GPU guys, right, for capacity. And even some of the new capacity being built is the geometries are so small. That's not the stuff that's going into, again, the industrial automation, the things that are, really what's still made in the US, frankly. So I think a lot of our customers are gonna be really clamoring because there's solid demand out there, and they're clamoring and looking for ways to, get some support and some help, and whether it's a hard cost savings or a soft cost savings, because we're gonna help defer, ownership, give them the flexibility to push and pull some inventory, maybe do some long-term schedules and things that really help them manage their cash flow. So we see a lot of opportunities for that already starting to blossom for us. And, the back half of the year for us, we could already tell based on our current run rate of inbound business, we're gonna be on a really big path this year. And we're doing all the things that come with that, adding staff, continue to do that. Obviously adding somebody like Andy who really helps us, tackle some of these customer related issues. So it's exciting. And I think there's a lot on the table, and it's not all bad news. I mean, it's about if you can execute and solve the problem, it's good news, right? Good news for our customers and good news for us, hopefully.
We talk to customers all the time, just to kind of end with it. This is always been and always will be a cyclical industry, right? There's going to be peaks and valleys. And, the thing that I think is interesting, it used to be every 3 to 4 years, you'd expect some form of allocation or extended market constraint that would last 6 to 8 months. I think the time between these challenges is going to come in. I think the time they last is going to be a little bit longer, just based on, how fast technology, it feels like Ohm's law gets challenged every single day. It's just advancing so quickly. And we give Arrow a little bit, but they had a great commercial back in the day that, by 9 o'clock in the morning, just from the time you get up to the time you eat breakfast, you're touching a dozen products that have electronics in it. And that is so different than 2 decades ago. And it's only going to continue. So, it's an exciting space to be in. But with that comes the challenges, and back to John's point, I think, from my experience being on both sides of the fence now, you absolutely are always going to need good franchise distribution relationships. They are the cornerstone of the industry. But if you do not have a good independent on your side and have other paths to market, you're absolutely going to be missing opportunities.
Yeah, excellent perspective. Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for differentiating too, kind of what the independents do that's different. It seems like it's very complementary is what I'm taking away from this, right?
Sure, absolutely, for sure.
And like we said, everybody's talking now, communicate with all your suppliers, expand your supplier base, right? Because you just don't know. And Andy, I appreciate when you're talking about the various disruptions, which he didn't say is whatever Mother Nature is going to throw at us this year too, right?
Yeah.
That's the other unpredictable, right? Something
Absolutely.
happens and the world goes boom and we got to react to it, right? So,
For sure.
Listen, before I leave, I do want to say for anybody who's watching this and wants to reach out, I think the best way to connect with these gentlemen is probably through LinkedIn or reach out. You can get their information. Go to the website. They do have a nice new website here this year, I noticed. So it has been updated. You could find both of these gentlemen on there and their information there as well. So any other way that you prefer, is that okay?
No, that's a good way to get started. They can find us easy enough.
Very good. So, gentlemen, again, thank you for this. Let's do this again later in the year and see if all of your predictions come true or not, huh?
Sounds good. Hey, you're always appreciated. Thank you so much.
A lot of fun. Thanks, Eric.
Appreciate it.